Welcome back. Play some music. Okay, this time I'm playing this one and it's gonna work. Okay, it's working. We got an hour of that. Sorry if you don't enjoy the music. I'm just playing things. It's from Indonesia, apparently, or Indonesian. I don't know if it's from Indonesia, but so I think that was the earliest. Yeah. Okay. So I watched this William Sager, the largest volcano in the world, mid-Pacific Ocean. Talking about a place called Tamu Massif, as they named it, which is in Shatsky Rise. So we're gonna go through some of this. First this, and then I literally pulled up his Google Scholar and just opened a bunch of Google Scholar articles. I haven't really looked at them besides the names, and yeah, go from there. So here's Shatsky Rise over here. So notice something that I just don't think they noticed. I don't think they noticed, anyone doing this, that this has an arc that then goes up this way and goes up here and then arcs back down to Hess Rise. So there's some discussion of whether Shatsky Rise and Hess Rise are related, but they're literally not just related, they're connected. I don't know what's going on, why, like, they must notice. There must be some recognition that there's an actual connection of a wave-like structure there. Similar to what's going on in the mid-Pacific Mountains where there's a wave-like structure. So let's pull up the magnetic anomaly map of the Earth. So definitely watch my most recent episode at least, if because I'm not going to go through things. This is all based in Earth expansion and interpreting the data in the model that I've been presenting for hundreds of episodes and building for hundreds of episodes. So this episode is going to be more focused on active research on the fly on the episode, so it might be a little slow in that regard, but we'll see what happens. I'm going to start though by going through this video. Mid-Pacific Mountains though formed here under North America. So I was thinking maybe there's some similar thing over here with regard to like Shatsky Rise and Hess Rise. I did do this in the past, so it's kind of interesting. Where I was thinking maybe something of this nature, ignoring Hawaii somewhat, because that may not have formed while I was here, although it might actually have. But where Hess Rise has this little indentation in it, which I just thought would be, like if we go over here, Hess Rise, this indentation, I thought it would make sense to me if I just put it around this of the Colorado Plateau, the center of it. Like there's a circle here that kind of has a similar radius to that. Maybe let's even do that real quick. So let's just say, take a picture here. Whatever. No. Sure. Okay. And then come over here without changing the size. Looks like if I scroll out a little bit, I don't know if I can on this. I just want to see how centered it is. It's about like maybe a little between halfway. Halfway is probably like Hawaii. A little bit to the side, so just to try to balance it a little bit to the side, like there. And then we're literally just gonna cut this, paste it here, zoom in, and then cut this circle out. Paste, and just boop. I guess pretty similar size. It's pretty similar in size. So I suspect that there's something, like that's a good hinge point, I suspect. But I'm still not certain about this stuff. This is definitely a little more complicated. But I was thinking, here's Shatsky Rise and some other features around it. And Hess Rise over here. I was thinking maybe Shatsky Rise for future reference. I haven't really looked into it, but it has some relationship to Australia, which was here. So if we go to animations, here's Papua New Guinea, which was connected to Australia, which was connected to Sulawesi and North Maluku, which was connected to the Philippines, like so, with Australia backing all of them, like so. Weird. Why did that not open? So maybe Shatsky Rise has something to do with this region, is kind of what I was thinking. In terms of a overplating, like it formed below this region, maybe is generally what I was thinking when looking at it. I don't know. Just a thought that occurred to me recently. Okay, before I get distracted though, let's just real quickly go through this. So this is all Shatsky Rise, which is composed of Tamu Massif, the single largest volcano in the world, according to interpretation at least. Whether or not it's truly a volcano, I would say is debatable, but maybe its nature sheds light on the nature of volcanoes. And then Ori Massif, which these are two smaller volcanoes, and Shirshov Massif. And then this ridge, Papanin Ridge. Let's check that out real quick, because that's really that hook. That's this region. Let's see if Papanin Ridge is considered. It's interesting that it said California when I looked for it. Images. Like, they must know that there's a continuous arc between Shatsky Rise and Hess Rise. Ocean Rise Seamounts. Dual hotspot tracks formed by the Shatsky plume. Let's see if he's an author of this. Nope. Okay, let's keep that open. Come back to this. But, so basically I watched this video again and had some realizations. So let's just go ahead and go through it. I took down a couple pages of notes. TAMU stands for Texas A&M University. Literally, they named it after their university because they were the ones researching it and discovering it, and so that's where that comes from. So it doesn't have necessarily a more nuanced meaning, like all sorts of things that are named in interesting ways, that have, like, the word itself has some root meaning that maybe almost like subconsciously was named by some relationship that it points to. that's of interest. I don't know, maybe Tamu has other meanings that aren't Texas A&M, that they're not themselves aware of, really deeply subconscious meaning that brought them to say Tamu. But anyway, besides the point, let's just keep going. Shatsky head, Rise, is it a plume head? So the question, from plate tectonics framework, the concept is that there feasibly is some type of mantle, deep, low mantle plume head that rises to the surface and breaks through as this volcano. So that's one of the potentials for how this oceanic plateau formed, called Shatsky Rise, and particularly Tamu Massif. Lower mantle geochemical isotopic signature not present. So there's no lower mantle geochemistry isotopic signature present. It doesn't have what would be expected from a mantle plume, is basically what they conclude about it, which is an anomaly from that interpretation. It's basically because it's not. So definitely see my most recent videos. It's definitely an undercurrent, like that's not a question. Undercurrents flowing and colliding and interacting in a way where they reduce the flow rate of one another and lead to like an upwelling of material that compacts in a location that produces an oceanic plateau, just like on Tongue Java and all these other places we've been talking about in the last several episodes. Definitely the same general thing going on here, but there's some interesting features here that I haven't really thought about yet, but that point to particulars of interest. So that's one of the details that kind of shed light on that it's not from the mantle. And it's from the mantle in that it emerged from the mantle in Pakistan and flowed below the crust of Pakistan and out throughout the entire globe, where it then collided with itself and created mounds as oceanic plateaus. So it's from the mantle, it's just not directly sourced like that, so its geochemistry is not what would be anticipated. Plus, even from the mantle, it's really from the upper mantle, probably. Okay. Looks like mid-ocean ridge basalt, so it's very similar in geochemistry to just the mid-ocean ridge basalts. Anything like over here, particularly like these. The basalts that make up the ocean floor here are called mid-ocean ridge basalts that have a specific general range of geochemistry, which Shatsky Rise is similar to. So it's got that going on. Maybe if I go forward, I'm not sure. Let's just keep reading. Environmental effects from released volatiles not observed. So it's formed around at 145 million at the Jurassic Cretaceous boundary, and there's no obvious mass extinction that might be expected from such a large eruption, which I found very interesting. Like, not that there would be mass extinctions in that regard, but that there is like this lack of a correlation that present. So if it's literally erupting below the crust, so remember I just mentioned I think Australia was above it when this was forming, so like based on generally this kind of thing, so like Australia was here in the same, this is below the crust even though I put it above it, so it's below the crust, like below North America, and adjacent is the Philippines through like the Juan de Fuca region, and then Sulawesi and North Maluku, and then beyond that, adjacent to those, is Australia. So I suspect this is going on below Australia, this region of Shatsky Rise. It's happening there, which is interesting because Australia, as I've talked about it a lot, is like an ammonite shape. So it's happening, it seems, and my best guess is somewhere over in this region. Just by a quick coupling of the locations. Where the Philippines were here. And then Sulawesi and North Maluku were generally here. Philippines here. And then these islands were actually conjoined as a single landmass, not islands that became etched by the Earth's expansion process. Current flows that etched this into islands and segmented it away from Australia and Papua New Guinea. And this region was down here with Sulawesi and North Maluku next to it. And all of the Indonesian archipelago kind of wedged between to form this region and arced around. Like a wet current went in that arced around and pushed out this gap. But not until after this was separating from this by just current flows weakening the connection between them. And so in essence, if this is generally true, where and if we look also like over here at the shape there, if we look at this, it's kind of interesting. Just a quick side note, like kind of in this region, I believe, I'm not sure if that's where it's, if we go across from this corner in California, across to the base of the Rockies, I'm not sure where the center, let's just find it. This center is centered on 109.7, let's say, and 37. 109.7, 37. 109.7, 37. It's centered around there. So maybe it was forming generally in this region. I was thinking maybe there was an abutting of the Hess rise, sort of like mid-Pacific Mountains against the shape itself. I don't know if I see it there, but this also is highly etched later by the processes of the Rocky Mountains. So if we look at probably this one, no, I mean it kind of has it down here. Current flows that like went down this way and continued. Probably reshape this region, like this material, because these pink mounds are literally mounds of material, where the blue is void of material. Places where current flowed, places where current compacted material, dependent on the color, is what magnetic anomalies ultimately are indicating. Okay, so back to this. Before I get lost on hypotheses, let's just look at some data. So no obvious mass extinction relationship to this volcano, which is kind of like a super volcano. It's the largest single volcano on Earth, according to current interpretation and awareness, at least. I would imagine the mantle puncture hole under Pakistan is ultimately larger because it swept in the entire globe with an under layer, but below the crust, and it never exposed itself because it's still below Pakistan, where this one's exposed so we can see it. It's just like a side effect of the other one, though. It's not even its own thing. So it's volcanoes of Tamu, Ori, and Shorshov Massif. Tamu Massif is 30 kilometers thick, and most of it is in the mantle, he said, but we're going to look at some papers to really try to get a better idea of that detail. I don't know if we're going to make it to in this episode, honestly. It's like, how many episodes is it going to realistically take? Okay. Looks like one big volcano, but without interior structure, we can't be sure. So here's Olympus Mons on Mars for comparison. He did point out Olympus Mons is substantially taller at 21 kilometers, where Tamu Massif is only like 3 or 4 kilometers above the ocean floor, but again, it goes deep down. So its actual height, I believe, is more comparable to Olympus Mons. I wrote it down somewhere, but I don't know when we'll get to that detail. And let's keep going. Formed at, so this is really interesting. It formed at the Pacific Farallon as Izanagi triple junction. Here's Tamu Massif. It formed at this triple junction, which then raises questions about if it's related to a mantle plume, which we'll get to as we keep going. It's dated to 144.6 plus or minus 0.8, so there, right there. Same age as magnetic anomalies under it, so this is one of the few that has magnetic anomalies associated with the oceanic plateau in this way, apparently. At least ones that are reversing through the process. Okay. Triple junction jumped east, which I'm pretty sure is the next one. So if we keep watching this, here's the apparent location of the triple junction, which is really, from what I've interpreted, is literally a current flow going this way that fans out as the Pacific Ocean, Western Pacific here, fans out from literally over here, though, underneath North America, which is why the mid-Pacific mountains form here, up here. So it goes up this way, forms the mid-Pacific mountains along this boundary, but it keeps going until it runs into resistance over here, which is where this triple junction is, with relationship to currents flowing across from, again, here's the mantle puncture hole in Pakistan, which flowed out westward, but they also flowed out eastward and basically created this boundary that they flowed along. So they flowed out this way, along this way, basically, to flow over to this region, where they then interacted with this other current, which leads to the triple junction location. So really what we're seeing is like a balance between them, and then a bending where it overwhelms and causes this current to go down. So bending of this current. So this triple junction, if we just keep going, moves, triple junction, it moves eastward and then northward. And as it does so, it creates Tamu Massif. Oops. East and then migrated northeast, direction not consistent with stable geometry. So there's some anomalies with what's going on here that are like, why is this happening from a plate tectonics framework? But really just shed light onto the nuances of the Earth's expansion process, of these undercurrents that were present that caused the Earth to expand. And it keeps going past Tamu Massif. And then there's Ori and Shorshov Massifs up here in the zone of the triple junction's motions. So large volcanoes formed in the center and north part of the plateau, smaller than initial eruption. These ones are smaller than Tamu Massif. And then he just mentions possible connection to Hess Rise. And it even has this bend, like it's clearly bended. Like they're literally connected physically. So they must be related. I mean, there's no question. I don't know. It's just plate tectonics can't explain it easily, so it's kind of hidden by the guise of science and the rigors of science. Oh, we don't know that. We don't know that kind of thing. That doesn't allow for the like obvious to just be understood and like worked as a likely aspect of the analysis from like an early stage. Has to be like late in the game when those types of things that are just blatant but not as easily explainable can enter into the fray, like Earth expansion. Okay, so formed, okay, triple junction, direction not consistent with stable geometry. Shatsky Rise begins with massive, rapid eruptions. And then some observations, which we've already gone into a little bit, are not explained by the plume head hypothesis. There's a concept of it upwelling energy. The triple junction coincidence, he said. The fact that Tamu Massif forms at a triple junction, if we consider that it's a mantle plume, it would mean that this is a coincidence. Like this mantle plume's rising and it comes up and it hits at this triple junction. So as he points out, the odds are low, apparently calculated at 0.4%, that a random plume head would erupt not just at Tamu Massif, but within 800 kilometers of a triple junction. So either the plume knows how to find the triple junction, or the event is highly unlikely that a mantle plume is doing this. And then possible explanation is maybe upwelling at fast spreading triple junctions can suck a plume. So like the plume is upwelling and then there's this triple junction that has outflow and that like pulls the plume into it. So they kind of come up with some way to maintain the modern interpretations by providing things of that nature, like, oh, well, maybe it's pulling it in, so it's not coincidence, it's just got pulled in by this like outlet at the triple junction specifically, even though the entire boundary should be an outlet. So it's not like there's not outlets at other regions, it's just that's the optimal outlet. And come up with explanations for that, but that's okay. Too many coincidences. So let me just read a little bit. Shatsky Rise and Hess Rise are on the track of the Pacific Farallon Izanagi Triple Junction, PFI, where Magellan Rise and Manihiki Rise, which I need to look into Magellan a little more because of this type of relationship and other reasons. It's for completion's sake and understanding's sake. Follow the PFP triple junction. I'm not sure what that is. Pacific Farallon Pacific? I don't know. Coincidences suggest spreading ridge control. That there's some like control to the oceanic plateaus forming with respect to the spreading ridges is what they're suggesting, I guess. I'm not even completely certain on that, but Shatsky Rise is the only large oceanic plateau, maybe that's here. Here it is. Formed during a time with magnetic reversals, so plate boundary evolution can be traced. It's the only large oceanic plateau formed during a time with magnetic reversals. I don't know what to make of it yet, but it's certainly of note. Only go through flank, not through Tamu Massif. So these magnetic reversals aren't through the central upwelling location of the volcano of Tamu Massif. They're just off on the boundaries where the magnetic reversals are. She's probably pointing to something, but I just haven't thought it through yet. I'm still looking at evidence, and hopefully I can kind of glean something more concrete from that as we go. Tamu Massif has most massive flows of the I'm not sure of, I guess, of the massifs here. So here are some drill locations they did in their study. And just the map, more so for the map than the drill locations, but with the magnetic anomalies, so we can kind of see they're on the flank, not at the center. This is Shatsky Rise and its constituents, these ones compared to Ontong Java Plateau. So he said that it's similar to Ontong Java Plateau in terms of its geochemistry, which again points to that it's not a mantle plume, but is an undercurrent, because we've already established Ontong Java is the result of an undercurrent where collisions led to compaction of material that led to a wedge forming between segments of the crust that then pushed them apart to then initiate the final process of Earth's expansion by breaking the continents into pieces, into continents, from a single landmass of crust. But by undercurrents flow below the crust at the mantle crust boundary, not like deep within the earth, even though they came from within the earth. In Pakistan, by the time they reached here, they're ultimately just inducing the same thing. So we're looking at Ontong Java Plateau, we're seeing it's similar to this because it's all from the same general undercurrents. For sure on that one. Appears to be waning in volcanism away from Tamu Massif. Maybe, here we go. What she said is away from, initially, with time, so in the beginning, Tamu Massif. But then a waning of this formation, as if there's some kind of changing in the direction, maybe? Maybe it builds up a wall here that this current ends up going around more so. And then this current ends up going around, kind of like the Azores Plateau, to then not interact with one another, because it really takes like multiple currents flowing into one another to create eddy type swirls that then compact material into and coalesce it in these undercurrents to then produce mounds that have become larger and larger. But then by the presence of the mounds, these cross currents get redirected so that they don't necessarily hit as much, which is probably why it creates this arc like this arc, because initially they're hitting over here, but then they start hitting up here, as well as this one goes below it, but also like it starts going around it up here so that the cross current hits it up higher, and then it hits it up higher, hits it up higher, and then it's kind of got like a boundary to that current going up that way. Like if we look over here, like this goes up this way. Generally here, we still see it over here, up this way. So it's kind of got a boundary. Here's Hess Rise, and here's that path. This. So it's got a boundary generally this way, where this current going up this way is not able to go. It's not over here. This region it's not going through, so it only goes this far over to the east in the Pacific Plate Formation, Western Pacific. So when this current comes across from Pakistan, goes something over here to go over here, and starts to go around it, it goes up. But then the boundary over here, it re-collides over here. Maybe it also has a boundary as high as there, I'm not sure. Oops. This is up here, seemingly. It's generally related across there. Maybe like if we follow it this way, like straight across here, it kind of has like an upper boundary in that region. But if we follow it more down this way and down this way, down through here, it has a lower boundary, more so over here. I'm not sure if it's maybe down here even, where it runs into this current, goes down, and kind of swirls here at this, like, at this point of the last possible interaction where, like, it can't go any further. This current can't go any lower to go around this current. This current can't go any lower to go around it, so they build up material at Shatsky rise kind of thing. Maybe something of that nature. Okay, let's keep going. Geochemistry again looks like Ontong Java and mid-ocean ridge basalts. If a big buoyant blob coming up from the mantle came up from the mantle, it ought to push out things up high, is a quote from him. Iceland is thought to be at the top of a mantle plume, and it is a high island. It sticks up by a kilometer or two. So the question is, does Shatsky rise do that? No, not really, end quote. I might have paraphrased a little bit, but basically that's a quote from the video. So my thought is, Iceland did not form with a continent atop it, so it was able to more easily free flow upward, whereas Shatsky rise, these currents are colliding and then they're going upward, but they're physically running into a continental crust above it. That's above it. So what do? They fan out and fill a certain area at a certain height, but they don't continue up so much. They more so just occupy a larger and larger region and just bulge, but they don't grow as tall as something that doesn't have a cap atop it of a physical continental crust. So that's kind of my thought on why that would be the case. Shallow water sediments, but no evidence of emergence. So generally it formed at low and shallow water, which maybe points to some things in terms of the current flows having water also below the crust with the magma. I'm not sure. Or to just the water getting in between the layers as it etches through the crust, etches through here. It drains down into the earth and is able to interact with the above continental crust and the magma of the mantle flow to make it appear as if it formed in a shallow water setting. Something of that nature. I don't know exactly what to make of the shallow water setting, but so it doesn't fit the plume model very well, he says. And then, really interestingly, he put it atop the map of the United States. Now, he put Shatsky Rise over here. I was like, could I be mistaken? Wouldn't it be crazy if it was like almost exactly this? But the Mid-Pacific Mountains are not in place, so it's definitely not. But it's very close. He was just showing, look at the distance from Honolulu to where they did their study, because they took a ship from Honolulu to over there to Shatsky Rise, so they had to go pretty far, literally like the distance of of the United States, and in the east to west distance on this ship. So it took them a while. Apparently it took them 20 days of total transit to do this, as well as lots of setbacks, which I thought kind of interesting. Unfortunate setbacks too. People having heart attacks and other illnesses. But if we just shift this over a little so that this is atop the Colorado Plateau, I mean, it's really interesting that this image, that he made this image. Here's the setbacks. Let me just keep going. Why is Tamu Massif important? You can read those if you feel. Thickest crust under center of plateau. So here's an image. Notice, I presume the depth of the crust. Oceanic crust is usually about that thick. Like 10, 20 kilometers thick, but this is more in the area of 30 kilometers in thickness at its like central region. So it's really almost like this colliding currents went up into the continent above, and in so doing also started to push down into the mantle and redefine the moho, the crust mantle boundary layer of the moho to be at a different depth at that region, where it's kind of just compacting this material together to form this huge mound, which then led to us now seeing it as having a crustal thickness that's much thicker, of around 30 kilometers, which is more on par with Mount Olympus. Also, interestingly, it's much more steep going downward than it is upward. Like a reverse volcano. Inverse volcano. Something, I don't know, interesting. So let's keep going. Why is it important? Vastly larger than the common. So maybe I'll just go through this real quick. These are just where they took seismic data along this line, and here's that, which is interesting. It's got this like uplift looking thing with an uplift looking thing, and this is like a 30 times magnified on the y-axis, so it's not really this steep. It's much more like the last image, kind of like this one, or like this one kind of steepness. It's much more like this, but they magnified it to really show its definition and characteristics. So we see it much more looking steep. It's just not like that. I mean, it's like that according to the axis. It's just the axis is made so that we can see it more defined. So there's some kind of thing going on. Which maybe is like a focal point where the currents were flowing to then build up from. Like that's where it upwelled from, like a currents colliding and then creating an upwell that then filled outward from that point, kind of thing, which is generally there, creating Tamu Massif. Another segment, so this one's gonna have segment 1, 2, 3, or A, B, C, D, or something like this to just get some other cross sections of the seismic, so we see again some kind of upwelling that generally matches the upwelling above it. Okay, and then another one down there to the west of Tamu Massif's like peak here, so we shouldn't see like the same thing, and we don't see any like type of upwelling thing, just kind of generally a higher elevation at the center of the across here pretty much, and not as much nuanced things going on here, and some faults which maybe point to things that I'm not thinking of, but I don't know off the top of my head what to make of it, except just to acknowledge there's some faulting there. Maybe some subsequent spreading extension of this. I don't know if there's extension of Tamu Massif at any point in the same way as like Exmouth Plateau had a bunch of extension. So another cross section, and he pointed to a potential caldera here. He called it a caldera. I would call it a potential caldera, maybe, which might have formed in this process, so it could have a caldera-like thing, and maybe it just is kind of how volcanoes form and have formed, but I'm still not certain it's like synonymous with a true volcano as we know them, because it's really this collision of currents that's just producing an upwelling at their point of collision. Here's another one, Ori Massif, with its seismic data. So I'm just going to go through this real quick. Shatsky Rise is surprisingly deep. I'm not sure if I wrote down information on what he was getting at here, so let me just zoom in. Eruption depth and subsidence of the Shershov Massif, Ori Massif, Ori Tamu Massif, subsidence of 3558, subsidence of Ori Massif of 4161, subsidence of Ori Massif over here at 3240. I'm not sure what to make of this data, but each near summit site shows some evidence of shallow water, but only one implies emergence. 34 or 1349, I'm not sure. Where that is on this. Possibly down here. There's 1347. Seismic data from Tamu do not show obvious wave erosion, which is it's just another evidence that this is not actually 145 million years old, in spite of it being radiometrically dated as such. I would say. I remember having that thought when I first saw this, like, proof positive? This ain't no 145 million year old volcano. This thing was a much more recent in its formation. That's why the waves haven't eroded it. Okay, let's just keep going. Ontong Java Plateau was completely submarine, apparently. Summits were near sea level, but not greatly emergent, which also Ontong Java Plateau formed over here with this undercurrent flowing this way and over this way and colliding with currents over here to then compile this mound. But there's also above surface currents like these where there's water going into the Gulf of Mexico, and like these, like this, going this way. Water going here. There's water coming out here, or across here maybe, and down in there maybe. Not completely sure, but water involved for sure everywhere. So it probably is going down, and like there's a lot of water more than likely in this region, which is why the Ontong Java Plateau has evidence that would lead to a completely submarine formation. Oh yeah. So why is Tamu Massif the world's biggest volcano? Important, Tamu Massif is vastly larger than the common seamount. It is a different class of volcano. Okay, so we're getting close to finish with this video and my notes on it, so we can finally almost hour in get to the rest of the things I was looking at. So vastly larger than the common seamount is different class of volcano. So there's a bunch of seamounts, common seamounts that are smaller. Smaller ones tend to have greater than 5% slope, where this one has less than 1% slope. Indicates lava flows that travel long distances and do not form high slopes. Again, this is because there's a continental crust above Shatsky rise as it's forming, so it can't just freely grow upward, so it has to like spew out sideways. It goes up, but then it goes sideways, which then leads to what we see it as, where these other ones, they go up and probably run also frequently, at least, into continental crust, but they're not as large of upwellings, so they're able to stay more sloped in their structure, I would say. Indicates lava flows that travel long distances do not form high slopes, high effusion rates, low viscosity flows, so they're able to flow out more easily, which may or may not be actually relevant because of, with regard to the other seamounts, they're probably composed of largely the same material. I'm not completely sure. It's just a matter of that there was more collision with this upper plating of literally a continental crust layer of the crust itself of Australia above it, that's just holding this upwelling from pushing up much higher than a 1 degree slope. So it may just be something of that nature without an actual difference in the material. Why is Tamu Massif a single volcano? Large in placement as single locus. Plate drifted rapidly between volcanic pulses. Let me see if I wrote anything. So again, kind of just, it's probably moving Australia, like it creates this bulge. Mind you, there's a aspect of Australia, this is very important, where it was undergoing, it has a nucleus up here, an ammonite shape that had a nucleus that was undergoing processes of radioactive decay on a fractal scale, which caused it to become an ammonite in shape. And Australia tilted, so maybe Australia actually tilted southward initially, and then northward subsequently. Like if this side of my hand is southern Australia and this side, my wrist is northern Australia, it went like this. So the northern Australia was tilted up, southern Australia was tilted down. It might have to do with that Shatsky rise is forming and then moving out from under it, and it like it compensates by bending back. But then the northern or the southern side of Australia here ends up tilting upward more. Something of that nature. I know if you don't believe the Earth expanded or haven't seen my work, this might sound all pretty crazy, but it's just highly evidenced. Highly evidenced. What does Tamu mean? Plateau meaning, like, what do we learn from this, I guess? Plateau formation relies on large extraction of magma from mantle at one spot. I want to say extraction as much as compaction of, like, again, collision. For these to form, it relies on there being a collision point where magma is forced to kind of just stay put, and then it forms these plateaus which then wedge open the crust and push the crust apart, and then they can slide out. Like the entire plate of the Pacific was under North America, and it slid out of Western Pacific was under North America, and it seems like also Australia, and that slid out another way, or Australia slid off of that, while the Western Pacific stayed attached to Asia, but slid out from under North America. Oceanic plateaus need not have distributed overlap, or I've skipped one, massive flows similar to, I don't know if this is Columbia flood basalt, Caribbean flood basalt, or what? I'm not sure what CFB provinces, or if it's just generic continental flood basalt provinces, maybe. Not sure what CFB means in this context. It could mean any of those things, really. I would say continental flood basalt provinces is the most likely, even though we're really looking at oceanic. So, like, Deccan traps and Siberian traps and things would be continental flood basalt, as well as Columbia River flood basalt. And on tongue Java, so they're similar flows, massive flows, similar to these places, suggests common link, which is the undercurrent flows that flowed out under the crust from Pakistan in all directions and collided and created the magnetic anomaly map of the Earth. Oceanic plateaus need not have distributed overlapping sources. I can't remember. I think that was just saying, like, the Tamu Massif is a single volcano, and there's not really evidence of multiple upwelling points, like many volcanoes making up this one plateau. So they can have essentially one focal point, one lotus, single lotus, where it comes from. But again, that can be just that the currents are colliding at that point. Single edifice can be much larger than previous thought, as large as the largest known in the solar system. So basically, volcanoes are not as limited as we thought on the Earth, is one of the things we can learn from Tamu Massif. Then Plumer Plate. This is the last slide just about. No observation clinches the argument yet. When we only think in terms of plume, like a mantle plume coming up, boop, or plates moving and mantle coming up by the plate motions. When those are our only options, because we are in a plate tectonic paradigm, then there's no, like, conclusion, no observation that proves either, because both are false, basically. From surface observations, we can't tell whether the magma came from the lower mantle. Like, basically, there's no indication by seismic data according to, this is 2014, this video, that's why I went to his other papers. That's one of the things I even found, is like MOHO related Shatsky rise studies. So I was trying to find more information around this topic from his other papers that are not in a video format that can help us figure out what exactly is going on here. But according to observation, there's no indication of a magma from the lower mantle. Massive volcanism implies a massive magma anomaly. Question mark, is it a plume? But it could just be undercurrents of massive magmatism below the crust that are flowing out under the crust in all directions that then collide and upwell, building material there, and look like a plume, because we don't know that that happened. Basically, we don't know that the Earth was punctured at the mantle boundary of the crust in Pakistan, and that current flowed out in all directions and collided. So we don't entertain that possibility when looking at evidence. So we say, is it a plume? And just kind of say it came from below. And one of the things that like someone thinking in the plume framework would see as evidence is this evolution of the Shatsky rise, where there's not just Tamu Massif, but there's Ori Massif and Shirshov Massif, which look as if there's a plume head to tail model where there's like multiple points, like a plume coming up, and then it creates Tamu Massif, but the plate moves, and then another upwelling of the plume creates Ori Massif, and the plate moves, and then another upwelling. That kind of concept is believed to have some evidence by this, but that doesn't mean that's what's happening. Like, if there's no evidence that the lower mantle has a mantle plume, then there's no reason to interpret that there was a mantle plume at this location. So, like, to even interpret this way is just circumstantial. Because, like I said earlier, it could be a collision of currents that builds up a mound that leads to, like, a rebalancing of where those currents collide, that leads to another mound, that leads to a rebalancing where those currents collide, that leads to another mound. Strong link to spreading ridges and triple junction. So this is actually against a plume and for the plate interpretation linked to plate boundaries, but no ridge-related faulting. Geochemistry similar to Ontong Java Plateau and mid-ocean ridge basalts, which is against a plume interpretation, and maybe is related from the plate tectonics framework to a plate boundary kind of interpretation, like it's coming as an upwelling at the plate boundaries. But there's, like, again, it can be explained by undercurrents that are flowing below the crust. Evidence of emergence lacking. Not a plume, so there's just not evidence. Lacking evidence for the hypothesis. And then he says another possibility. Perhaps we don't understand the problem. I mean, we can read the rest of the sentence. But really, perhaps we don't understand the problem because we are thinking in a plate tectonics framework and are not thinking in the Earth's expansion process framework and are not recognizing that the magnetic anomaly map of the entire Earth is created by undercurrents that flowed and interacted with one another to bend and create swirls that then created certain magnetic anomalies, or that interacted to a point where they broke the crust apart and then flowed out to create an ocean bed. And before, in doing that, created oceanic plateaus and large igneous provinces from pressure building up and just creating emissions to either to the crust, to the surface of the crust as a continental flood basalt, or between the surface of the crust as a oceanic plateau to wedge the crust apart. And the division into plume versus plate end members is incorrect. Nothing particularly there. Let me just read. I know I wrote a couple of other things. It is covered with manganese nodules, which I didn't know what to make of it. I just wrote it down. My initial thought was maybe in a fractal sense, it's like a manganese atom. I don't know. That would be cool. If it's like best represents a manganese atom. From a fractal sense. If you don't know what I'm talking about, apologies on that one. What did he just say? Yeah, apologies. That's deep down the rabbit hole of my research. But see like my Sage Wall videos, my Carolina Bays videos, where there's like fractal occurrences of certain structures that point to certain things. Maybe that was my thought here, like this abundance of manganese nodules may be because there's a larger scale manganese nodule that is the entire Shatsky rise, or at least Tamu Massif, that then behaves like a physical fractal atom, because that's how the universe works, where there's fractals, repeating structures, where like entire continents are atoms on different scales. Like there's several atoms that make up all Africa, like this nucleus here with like a polygonal shape that then has a polygonal shape down here connected to it, has like a diamond shape over here, a little triangle shape. Like these represent things fractally also up here. And if we look at this, you can kind of see these boundaries here, like a hexagon type thing over here, at least more visible at the top here. Another one here, another one here, where there are like molecules that the Earth is composed of. Like, so I made a periodic table of currents where it's like this, where there's a polygonal chamber that current flows into, and where it swirls is a space for current to flow, which is then a proton, but then it can compact mounds, which then are neutrons, and then this polygonal chamber is only stable with the appropriate balance, which then leads to the atoms. And I go through helium here, adding like this vortex, then etches it to a point where another vortex forms over here, which then becomes like helium and also creates another outlet. Like there's an inlet and an outlet here, but then it creates an outlet, so it has more of like a through path, but it's blocked by these eddies, so it's caused to go around them, and things of this nature going on that are pretty deep down the rabbit hole. And then periodic table of currents. Point being, maybe manganese. nodules are found at this location for a reason that is more like pointing to some fractal nature of it than would be immediately apparent if I didn't say something. Old ocean formation, no real heat flow. So he was pointing out there's no real heat flow in this location. It's old. It's 145 million radiometric dating. Old, even though it's not that old, it's thousands of years old, is when these undercurrents were actually flowing, because it's the global flood that is written of and spoken of in many ancient cultures and texts. When the earth was flooded, which also not written of so much, is that the earth also expanded in the process. So, this is already an hour, isn't it? Hour 10. I guess I'll just stop there. I could keep going. So I was looking around. It would probably be best to just kind of stop there, though. Because if I go into these things, it's just going to be like I came across this term from his work, the Jurassic Quiet Zone. So maybe we'll talk about that in the next one. Which, if we just read it, where maybe this one, Nature of the Jurassic Quiet Zone. Nature of the Jurassic Quiet Zone, a region of low-amplitude oceanic magnetic anomalies, has been a long-standing debate with implications for the history and behavior of the Earth's geomagnetic field and plate tectonics. I mean, if we just accept plate tectonics as fact, but the Earth expanded and then plate tectonics is false, so they're not really related to plate tectonics because it's false. But besides the point, to understand the origin of the Jurassic Quiet Zone, we studied high-resolution sea surface magnetic anomalies. So all of his work is related to magnetic anomalies in ways that I'm really excited to dive into. But I won't get into this yet. I'll see you guys in the next one, I guess. Thanks for hanging out. So that's all I got on Shatsky, guys, for now. See you then. Peace out.